Welcome to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall, helping you build a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hey friends, great to have you here in this episode. My guest in this one is Mat Casner, who is a web design freelancer and solopreneur who not only built his business by word of mouth and referrals organically, but also did it in a rural area. So Matt is based in Kansas, and if you know anything about Kansas, there's not that many big segments of population. I remember that from the band days when we did a few shows in Kansas. It's a whole lot of fields for the most part. However, Matt was still able to build a successful web design business largely through his professional and personal network, and did it in an area where there's not a whole lot of clients right around him. In this episode, he shares exactly how to do that for those of you in that situation. So if you are in a place where your ideal clients are either just not right around you, or you are in a place where you have to travel a long way to get to big groups of people, this episode I think is really going to be the one for you. It's different than what I have here in my neck of the woods, being in Columbus, Ohio, because it's such a booming city that there's endless opportunities for businesses nearby and networking. So to be able to talk with somebody who built his business rurally was, that's a hard word for me to say, rurally. Oh, it's getting bad. Anywho, awesome to have Matt on. Matt is now the guy behind freelanceceo.com, where he helps other freelancers become CEO. And he has one of the best taglines, before I bring him on, that I've ever heard. And that is, think like a creative, act like a CEO. That line so sums up how to be a professional solopreneur. So I can't wait for you to hear from Matt. I think his insight's really going to help you out, no matter where you are in your business, but particularly those of you who are based rurally. There we go. Think like a creative, act like a CEO. Speaking to somebody who does that well, here's Matt. Matt, welcome to the podcast, man. I'm so pumped to have you on and to spend a little more time with you here, dude.
Josh, thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's been a while.
You had me on your summit this past year. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so sorry. I'm blanking on the name. The Purpose to Profit Summit. Is that right?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah. Purpose to Profit Summit. Most summits have profit in them, so I'm getting them all jumbled now. So I wanted to make sure I know that right. But man, I really enjoyed getting to know you through that experience. And then you were recently on a good friend of mine, Shannon Mattern's podcast. And I did not know too much about your story, but from what I gather, you built your freelance web design business in a rural area. I cannot say rural. That's a hard one. But that idea, man, is like, I get that question so often. Like, how do I get clients if they're not around me? I do have a hard time sometimes answering from my context because I'm in Columbus, Ohio, big city. I had a lot of local clients. So if you're down, man, I can't wait to dive into to hear what worked for you.
Oh, no. Open book, man.
And where are you based out of?
Yeah, so good question. So geographically, I am in a small rural town. It's called Mound City, Kansas. And I'm straight south out of Kansas City, about an hour.
Okay.
So we're right on the Missouri border and south of Kansas City. So yeah, the town I live in has 650 people.
Wow. So yeah. I had a couple of experiences going through Kansas, in the band days. And there's not a whole lot there between a couple big cities. It was the first time that I discovered the insane, punch you in the face smell of a lot of cows in one field. We were driving and it was like, oh my God, who did that? And then when there was just this massive field of cows, it was like, holy crap, literally. So yeah, there's not a whole lot there. So even more interesting context to build a business when in that type of situation. So I would love to back up to hear how you got started and how you started getting clients, but maybe just to give us some context, would you love to maybe fill us in on kind of what you do now, because I know you're super passionate about teaching what you've learned.
Yeah. So I have spent the past 15 years as a freelance creative agency owner, and I've done brand, web, and graphic design for pretty much that entire stint, and still continue to do it today. But several years ago, Josh, is kind of where I took an opportunity to start doing some speaking at WordCamps and some other types of events like that. And I found myself people asking me questions about freelancing and how can I get started? How can I find clients? How should I price my services? And I know you've heard these questions too. I really was like, I had a unique perspective because I'd built a business over the past 15 years, and I had some information to share. And so that was kind of like the genesis of what my coaching career started off like. And fast forward a couple of years, I'm running I run an academy now that is an 8-week course for creatives. And then I have a group coaching program where we kind of walk through the business building journey together. And that has become a really, really cool passion of mine over the last couple of years. Not only am I getting a chance to share some of these business lessons that I've learned over the past couple of decades, but just getting to meet and hang out with some really cool people who have dreams of their own. People that are wanting to build a business, people that really want to use their skills and talents and experiences and passions to make an income, find some financial freedom and some freedom of time. It's just been really cool to be with those people.
Yeah. And, Matt, you're modest. Your website is freelanceceo.com for everyone wanting to check that out. I'm sure we'll bring this up again here towards the end of this conversation because I love what you're up to. But backing up to when you started doing freelance web design, you're in a rural area. I'm sure things looked way different 15 years ago. I mean, I actually think this is less of an issue now because everyone's doing Zoom calls. It's not uncommon to, would you agree with that? Like, do you think it's actually much more common now and easier to do things remotely, rurally?
Yeah, 100%. The pandemic, as bad as it was for our industry, it brought Zoom into the everyday business toolbox, and now meeting over Zoom is commonplace. I mean, I literally have my daily calendar set up with who I'm meeting with over Zoom, and doesn't really matter. I've got a great internet connection here where I'm at, and so I can literally meet with anybody who wants to do business with me. And we'll talk about this later. I mean, I don't mention that I'm from a town of 650 people. People don't ask. People don't care. They just want what I have to offer, and they don't care, where I'm at when I give it to them.
And did you find that was the case early on? Like, take us back to 15 years ago or so. How did you start getting clients? Like, I think I heard you talk on Shan's podcast. You started doing web design. It was very parallel to me and a lot of other people's journeys where it sounded like you just got asked to do web design. You start doing it. But then the big question becomes, well, how do I actually make this a business and how do I start getting clients, especially back then when there wasn't any Zoom?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say, Josh, that the secret sauce to making it go is having a good network. I had spent probably the 5 or 6 years prior to moving to Mound City, where I'm at right now. We lived in Kansas City, and I was a part of the agency culture in Kansas City. I was part of the corporate marketing culture in Kansas City, and I was doing a lot of entry level work. I was doing a lot of I was really kind of honing my skill set, working for some different organizations, but I really built a network, people that I worked with, clients I served, coworkers, bosses, and things like that. When we moved to Mound City, I was telecommuting a couple of days a week with my job in Kansas City, and telecommuting, it kind of date me. It's what remote working was 20 years ago. Okay. And it wasn't in vogue. It was a little bit more of a fringe type of an arrangement. But I was lucky to have a boss that was willing to let me work from home a couple of days a week. And that was me here in Mound City trying to figure it out. I mean, this is back in the dial-up modem days. I had to get a satellite on my roof of my house to pull in anything more than a dial-up internet connection. So that was challenging. But getting started, to be honest with you, Josh, today would be a whole lot easier. But back then, the reason why I was able to make a business go was because I had a really good network of contacts that I was able to leverage early on, people that knew me, people that liked me, people that trusted me, and were willing to give me a shot. And because of that trust factor, because of that network that had that trust factor, is what allowed me to get started and to build a business.
And when did you, so you were working in an agency, part of that culture, made a lot of contacts and stuff, but often that still doesn't translate necessarily to somebody building their own successful business or being able to go full time with it. So like when you started doing web design, I guess one question I'm curious about is like, what made you want to branch out on your own? If you're doing remote work for an agency, I imagine there was some stability there. Like what was the desire and pull that got you out of that to go on your own?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, there are a few factors. Number one, we moved to a small town for a lifestyle change for my wife and family. We had our two oldest kids were very young at the time, and we knew we wanted to make that shift to the rural community. That's kind of where my wife and I kind of have our roots in a similar type of a community. So that's what we wanted for our family. But the business side was something that I had to really, it was kind of an opportunity that presented itself, but I had to really weigh the options. When you step out on your own and become a full-time freelancer, I mean, you're assuming a lot of responsibility. And for me, I was a sole income earner in our family. My wife was staying home with our two kids. So I felt that additional pressure. But I also had a really strong side hustle prior to launching full time. So while I was working in agencies and while I was working in corporate, America, I was building my client base on the side. And, back then you had to be really careful with non-competes. You couldn't, take any clients away from any agency work that you were doing. But outside of that, it was really, whatever relationships you could build. And this is what I tell people that I work with, Josh, is that when you start to get good at something, when you start to build a reputation and deliver excellence in a certain field or market, pretty soon word's going to get around. And, I'm not saying you don't have to show up and don't have to promote yourself and get out there. And I'm I'm a little bit introverted in that way. And I really don't like a lot of outward, exposure, but I am really good with relationships. And for me, I was able to leverage some of the side hustle work that was going on. And, once I decided to take the step into full-time freelance, in some ways it was freeing because the side work was my passion because that's where I really felt like my opportunity was. And not going to lie, when I was working in agencies and I'm sitting in my cubicle working 60 hours a week, knowing how much I'm getting paid versus I know how much is getting billed out to the client. And I'm like, oh, there's a lot of dollars in between. There's some opportunity here. I think if I'm really careful with this, that's where I was able to finally, take the step out of the boat and make it go. And, it was a process. I'm not going to say that I was a rock star business owner right out of the gate. I mean, to be honest with you, there was a few years of learning under my belt that I had to get because, I don't have a business degree. I don't have an MBA. I was just a guy who could, who was a good designer. And I could solve some business problems. I just had to figure out how to make it work for myself.
None of those people are in online entrepreneurship anyway. They're working for somebody. I mean, honestly, like 99.9% of somebody who goes to college is going to work for somebody. Yeah. So that's great. I love that you have that backstory. And I also love that you said that you did not do like the outbound extroverted, like, look at me. I mean, obviously it was very different back then too, with video and no social media. So I guess the emphasis was probably ideal for you because you had to embrace your current network that you had built up both personally and professionally. Communication. I imagine I've heard you talk about how important communication is for you and just showing up and just all the like Midwestern traits that a lot of successful, like literally, I just see a lot of successful Midwest web designers who we show up on time, we try to do a really good job, and we care about our work. Then that's it. There's the secrets to success. So I am curious though, how did you practically start getting clients rurally though? Did you tell your network that you were doing this? Did you go to businesses when you were traveling? Like how did you literally start getting your first clients as a freelancer?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, to be honest with you, there's a little bit of hustle in there. With smaller communities, I mean, there are opportunities. There are local chambers of commerce where you've got a collection of local businesses. And, in rural America, especially in Kansas, I mean, there are a lot of small little towns, and they're typically networked not too far apart from one another. And honestly, I'm less than an hour drive from Kansas City. So, I mean, I can get in my car and in 30, 40 minutes, I can really be, in another city. I can be having lunch or having a coffee with a business owner. And so really at that point, once I kind of had myself established, the way that I was able to find work locally was really just plugging in the communities, plugging into those chambers, and really starting to build a new network among these local business owners.
So build a new network. So yeah. And similarly, like, I guess in all states, for the most part, there's like little towns that are not too far from each other that extend out from a big city. Was your approach to hit those little towns first before dive? Because you could have easily just driven an hour to Kansas City, but it sounds like you took a small town approach too. Was that intentional? Like going to the small towns, joining commerces, networking, meeting people like that versus going right to the big city kind of thing?
Yeah, no. I mean, the nice thing about having a lot of my contacts in the city was I had a really good pipeline kind of established when I started. In terms of network. And I was getting already a number of referrals from some of my network in Kansas City. And I was able to leverage that in some of my work history as I was building new context within some of the local networks and chambers that I was becoming a part of. Now, I will say this, I didn't litter my calendar with chamber appearances. There were a couple of key contacts that I developed in a couple of local communities. And once I kind of got a hook into some of those networks, then that became a little bit more of just a cultivation over time. Meet a business owner, help them, solve a business problem. And then, at that point, that would lead to maybe one or two other opportunities to talk and present. And, here's one of the cool things about a small town, Josh, is word travels fast. And it's good and bad. If you've got a bad reputation, I mean, don't worry. If you're in a small town, everybody's going to know by the end of the day. Good news is if you take care of somebody and you help them with a business problem, and I'm a little bit of a unicorn where I'm here in this little small town in Southeast Kansas, and there's not too many other people that do what I do. And so it becomes one of those things where you become known in the area. And that just you get a lot of phone calls for things that I get phone calls for things that I don't do, but that's just because people have heard my name around and I just have to tell them I don't work on computers and I don't take viruses off. So.
Right. I'm not your IT person to help out your aunt. That's not what I do. I do love that approach, man. I think like visualizing on a map, when you think about networking in a city, particularly if it's in person, a lot of people's approach is to go right to the big city and right to the big meetings and a big chamber of commerce, for example. But there is, I think, a quicker ROI. Like maybe you'll meet more people, but just like any sort of marketing, if you can find niches and places with smaller groups of people, word does travel fast and you'll make a bigger impact a lot more quick. Like case in point, as I'm trying to visualize this, when I joined my networking group, there were chapters all around Columbus. And similarly, I did have a little bit of hustle in the early days to get out to more chapters just to get my name out and be the web design guy that makes connections with people. And I had more success with the towns outside of Columbus rather than the ones that were right downtown. And then I thought, I remember, I don't know how I met this person, but she was some sort of marketing person with the Columbus, Ohio Chamber of Commerce, which is like a big one. And I thought big was like a couple hundred people or a few hundred people. I went there and there was like 2,000 people. And I was like, whoa, everyone's in suits and ties and I'm in my jeans and a black shirt. I feel weird. And I feel like a little kid, and everyone, like, these are like real adults that have like cologne on and stuff. I'm like, I can't, I should not be here. But it was a perfect example of this story and this framework. Like you can go to the big city and drive there, but make the connections with the the rural, smaller communities, because that does travel fast. And I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, did you have to do that for long, or did you just make a handful of connections, just do a really damn good job and let the referrals come in? It sounds like it went that way.
No, that's a great question, Josh. I mean, I think there are a lot of people that feel like to sustain yourself as a freelancer, you just got to be out hustling and cold calling like crazy. My philosophy is this, and you kind of mentioned it: find a customer, serve them well, be a trusted resource for them, and they'll be your customer and referral source for a long, long time. Probably one of the things that I can say that I've been able to do really well is retain clients. I mean, of course, I have the jobs where they hire me for a project or whatever, and then we part ways or whatever. But I've been really, really blessed to be able to develop relationships where I've got clients that have been in my business for well over 15 years, and some of them are monthly clients in terms of on retainer sort of a thing. And so again, it's one of those things where I feel like as a freelancer, we have a great opportunity to really be an adjunct part of a company that we're living. Most of the companies in rural Southeast Kansas don't have marketing departments. They don't have IT departments. They don't have that sort of staff. But to know that they have a guy kind of on a leash that's really accessible, that has a really, really unique skill set that they can leverage. I mean, to be honest with you, Josh, it's kind of a sweet gig because a lot of these people who would never, ever think of hiring somebody full-time on their staff, I'm kind of the shared IT or the shared web guy among the community. So it's worked out really well.
I love that. Your approach of like retention first. I mean, really what I'm gathering is that you had a customer retention approach from the get-go, which most people, including myself, come to that mindset later. It's like, oh, why didn't I do this for my first 50 clients that could be paying me monthly, and I could be, I haven't talked to them in like 10 years. Of course they're going to forget about me. So was that just natural for you, or do you feel like maybe did you see like churn and burn in the agency world that made you want to not be the shady agency that just burns clients? I'm curious, like where that came from for you.
Well, I actually saw a couple of those. I saw a couple of those relationships happen in front of me, and when you kind of are able to live vicariously through someone else, and you get to see the pain of a relationship gone bad between an agency and a client, and you just kind of take a mental note. It's like, I don't want that to be me. And, one of the things that I learned early on in one of the companies that I worked for was they were a web hosting, web development shop. And, I was looking at some numbers. I was really close with one of our supervisors and looking at our web hosting revenue numbers. We were hosting, websites for companies, on a monthly fee with, maintenance on top of that. And I learned that lesson pretty quick when I started doing website, design on my own. I started looking for a web hosting company that I could resell. And I was like, okay, if I can get into this and I can provide a monthly service to a customer, I can keep them long term, and I can start to build recurring revenue. And that's scalable. That's one of the things that a question I had to answer for myself pretty early on is how can I scale what I'm doing without multiplying who I am? And that
multiplying the hours you work.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. So that was one answer that I learned pretty early. And then from that point, I was just like, I would look for other opportunities to create those type of relationships ongoing with a client if it made sense.
I love that. What have you seen, if you're comfortable sharing, like what were some of the things that you saw go down in the agency world that just made you feel like, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to be that person? Like, I'm happy to share. I remember one of my best clients, we turned to this local company for digital marketing services because I didn't do digital marketing. And it was straight up, they treated him like a number on a spreadsheet. Like they had a sales guy who I knew, but then I thought he was going to be a little more involved throughout the process. And nope, he was gone immediately to the project manager. And then it just went off, and it did not go well. Like there was like zero yield in the marketing services, not due to the website that I built. I promise you that, but they just basically, it was just like, well, we just need to invest more to make it work. And they really did not, it didn't seem like they gave a crap, quite honestly. So I don't know if you've experienced something like that.
My experience went something like this, and the one that I'm thinking of that comes to mind right now is and I have to be very honest with you that, I'm a design guy. I'm not a copywriter, and I've never played one on TV or claimed to be one. But the one project that I had that I can tell you was just a horrible experience was the company that I was working for was not concerned about messaging. They were, at the time in the day, it was like, everybody wanted to put out everybody's website needed to be beautiful. And everybody, thought that if you have a beautiful website, you're going to get conversions. And what I watched some of my senior leadership in this company was they were not listening to the customer and really taking to heart what the business goals of the customer were. They kind of put their muffs on their ears and just kind of decided to do whatever they wanted to do. And hey, if we make it look beautiful, the client's going to love it. Well, I mean, you can probably guess what happened. It was not, we rolled it out and it was a flop. I mean, there was,
Gotcha.
the client was so upset, and they had good right to be, because literally, as an agency, we totally ignored the business goals. And so I took that to heart. I'm like, as much as I love design, as much as I love to make something beautiful, very conscious that the messaging to the client has to be baked in. It has to be a high priority. And anyway, just a hard lesson.
I was just thinking, I do think that's the biggest trend I've seen over the last few years in web design is content, copywriting first, messaging first. Design will follow function as far as like the goals of the customer and the website. All those things are so critical. It's one of the biggest regrets I have. I similarly was just concerned about a nice looking site. And then I didn't, the words were like something I plopped in there at the very end. And then I found that I was doing it all wrong. I was doing it completely wrong. Speaking of messaging though, how did you do your messaging and how did you come across when you started getting freelance clients? Because I'm curious, I can't imagine you were desperate feeling, but did you tell all your contacts, hey, I'm doing web design now? Or based off of what I've learned and seen in the agency world, I'm able to put that into practice with everything I know? Like, how did you come across in your messaging, whether in person or on your website?
Yeah. So I had a small email list of clients, and I really wasn't into email marketing at all. But it was a convenient way to be able to communicate with my clients. And so, there would always be a couple of emails that would go out a year where I would kind of be doing like a state of the union, sort of an update on where I'm at in my business. And it was really kind of it wasn't really well thought out. But I think it was enough communication to keep me front of mind, at least for a little while in some of these businesses' minds. And to be honest with you, Josh, I think I even kind of sucked at it in my own website for a long, long time. I mean, I was one of these guys that was kind of relying on the strength of my portfolio to sell myself. And I think for a lot of designers, I think that's kind of where they end up starting. And I started there. And I think over time, I learned to tell the story behind the project. And to me, and I'll be honest with you, a lot of things I've learned about messaging, I've had to learn from other people, whether it's podcasts, books, webinars, just trying to educate myself. I feel like as creatives, as designers, it's probably one of the biggest things we can do to give ourselves a lift is to invest a little bit and make sure that at least as designers, we're thinking about messaging and making a shot. I think if we take a stab at it, it's going to have a way better result than not thinking about it at all.
Great point. And I have to ask about these emails. Like, what type of emails did you send? Were they helpful? Were they educational? Were they just like, I had a burrito for breakfast? Like, what were the emails that you sent?
You know what? So I didn't know what I didn't know, Josh. And literally, I would just sit down and I would say, oh, okay, I haven't communicated to my customers in a little while. I guess I better write a letter. And so I would just kind of, I would start writing and just kind of talk about what I'd been doing the past 6 months. And, I'd have a conversation. I'd mention a couple of projects that I just completed, which I didn't realize that at the time, but it worked really well.
That's it.
And it wasn't flashy. It wasn't like some big multimedia email production. It was It was a text document that I BCC'd all my clients in the email line and blasted it out.
I literally have chills right now because in my membership, we just did a monthly training with the CEO of my agency, Eric, and it was about email marketing and what we're doing within Transit Studios, my agency. And I mean, he has a pretty robust system for emails. He's a couple years into it, so it's like an advanced level of email marketing. But I had a lot of questions about what I would do if I were just getting started. And I literally said what you just did. I said, I would probably do an email every couple months or maybe once a quarter and just share some recent projects and some wins and results we got. It wouldn't be anything fancy or flashy. It would just be, here's some projects. Here's what went really well. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we could help. We'd love to help you out moving forward. And that was it. So I got chills because what you did worked, and that's the best way to start. So I would encourage, challenge time. Everyone come back. If you're multitasking, come back. If you're driving, pull off to the side of the road and start an email right now and send it out to your clients and just do it every 3 months. That just shares some wins and some successes. Cause I guarantee everyone could boost their projects right now and get a boost with sales, even if you're out in the middle of nowhere, by just being front of mind and top of mind. And yes, you'll get some unsubscribes. Don't take it personally. I don't know what that looked like for you, but that's such a genius way to go, man. And it just strengthens the relationship. So I love hearing that. I don't feel like you're giving yourself enough credit, Matt, for the quote unquote simple things you did, because it's the simple things that work.
Yeah. Well, and today, now that I think about it, Josh, with the way, we really are. Today, email marketing is such a science. And, everybody's, concerned about open rates and click-through rates and that sort of thing. Opening up an email and just typing an email is such a pattern interrupt in the inbox. And, if somebody, that one of my clients, it's not unlike, a client to reply to one of those emails and just say, hey, thanks for sharing this with me. It's cool to hear what's been going on. Good to get an update. And I'm like, well, that was cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And to that point, I think it's actually now, because email marketing has become such a scientific, data-driven measurement thing, I actually have seen and personally feel that there is a big resurgence in just authenticity and stories. So to your point earlier, you instead of just having a portfolio, you learn to share the story of that client, that project. I can't encourage that enough. I've shared publicly here. I'm almost wrapped up with putting together a handful of success stories for my students, because I've done a good job at getting quick testimonials and snippets. And I've done a lot of podcast interviews with students, which are essentially case studies, but I haven't really intentionally got stories and really push those out. So my encouragement is for everyone to pick a few good clients and get their story, talk about where they were before they met you and your services and where they are now, some results you got. And if you can put some heart and some story into it, that will cut through all the scientific noise with email. The only emails I read, I have a few that I've signed up for from colleagues and stuff who are doing quote unquote newsletters, but they are just real honest thoughts. And so I've actually even considered doing maybe a weekly, just from the heart, here's what I'm thinking about stuff. Here's where things are at. I don't know. I don't know if I have the bandwidth for it quite yet, but I am considering doing that. Just maybe just sharing some of the resources I dished out this week and learned, and here's some challenge. I don't know. That's something I'm thinking about.
Yeah. It's crazy where we're at right now, Josh. You probably have seen it. Chat GTP now is buzzing. Everybody's talking about AI. Everybody's talking about, well, I can get an AI to write my blogs and write my email. And as I think about that, and I think about the time saving and just, what that could mean for us as business owners, AI cannot tell a story. AI cannot have nuance. AI cannot share a lesson. And to me, I feel like in this world of AI and automation and save time, I think there's an opportunity there. I think there's an opportunity to cut through the crap and share something personal, which I think is going to land even harder now.
My perspective, I totally agree, is that AI is not going to win because it can't share experience. AI is that college entrepreneur who has read a lot of books and has listened to a lot of podcasts, and everything they say, and I'm not against that. Obviously, we all borrow each other's information, but there's a very big difference between two entrepreneurs who you can tell one has actually built a business and done some stuff and has come into his or her own and learned a lot of lessons that you wouldn't learn in a book or on a podcast. And then there's that, again, that college entrepreneur who's like, okay, I've heard all this before. You're just regurgitating everything you learned, but you haven't actually done anything. That's my perspective. I don't know if you're in a similar mindset, but I totally agree. I do not think AI is going to be overtaking. And in fact, I agree. I think there's even more opportunity for authenticity and spelling mistakes and things that keep us human.
Yeah, I agree. I've looked at stuff that AI has cranked out, and it looks great, but it looks collegiate. It looks like something that someone put together for a paper. It's like too good.
Yeah, recently I had Katie Sandell, a guest on my podcast, who was really great entrepreneur based in Texas, and she had me on her podcast, and for the fun of it, she told me, she was like, I'm just going to try putting your stuff into chat GPT and just see what the questions it kicks out. And they were good questions, but they were just like you mentioned, they sounded like textbook questions. It was like, how would you start getting clients for your web design business? How would you price your services? How would you scale your business? It was just like, but there wasn't any human. It wasn't like, I don't know if AI would ask, what did you see in the agency world that, personally made you want to do something else? Like the question I asked earlier. So I agree, man. I am not worried about AI. I'm just not. In fact, I'm kind of excited to embrace the challenge of being more human, being more real, and being unrobotic and uncollegiant and unacademic. It's probably not even a word, which shows you I didn't go to college. So yeah, I'm super excited about your mindset.
We'll be the mold breakers.
Yes, anti-AI agency with Matt and Josh. So I am curious, you started growing your business. How long did it take to go full-time income?
So when I started freelancing, like I said, I was doing it as a side gig in 2005 is where I gathered all my eggs, I put them in the basket, and I gave my 2 weeks to my company and didn't look back. And in the back of my mind, I was like, well, this may be a short run. We'll see how long this thing lasts. And it's 2023 right now, and I'm still going. So that means something. But no, 2005 is when I totally stepped away. I had about 4 months of savings of income put away. And I was like, okay, we're going to see if we can make this work. And I had a couple of retainers that I was able to get a hold of before I started, and that was kind of my security blanket in terms of allowing me to have a little bit of faith that I can get this going, because that was taking care of a pretty good chunk of my monthly financial need. So yes, 2005.
So just a few years. Am I getting the timetable right? A few years doing a side hustle, building it up.
Yeah, I started the side hustle while I was in Kansas City. I was, this is really old. I mean, this is back in the early days of the web. I built my first website using Netscape Navigator Gold. So yeah,
I got started during the Dreamweaver days. So yeah, you were before that, and Front Page. I think it Front Page.
Microsoft Front Page.
Yeah. That was
never got into Front Page.
Right?
I was a Dreamweaver guy.
Yeah. Well, you're a pioneer, man. I feel like it's a shame that, now that you're coaching and have a podcast and other things, the world is going to hear about this story that, more need to hear about, because not only did you do it in a way that is like organic and rural and stuff like that, but you did it with technology being very, very different. Now, the caveat to that is much more saturated now. So, that's a good question. I think it's a good question. What's the difference now in a saturated market versus you back then, when I'm sure there wasn't that many freelance web designers?
Well, that's a great question. I just did a workshop the other day about Upwork, and is Upwork still a place where you can get good jobs? And I mean, I say yes, because there are more producers in the market like you and me, but I can tell you what COVID did for my small little town. When COVID happened, and this is an indication of what happened around the country. You know, when restaurants and stores had to close their doors because of mask mandates and because of COVID, it pushed all of these small little companies to find ways. They had to adapt, and they had to adapt quickly. They had to learn how to get their menus online. They had to learn how to do the curbside and do the online ordering. And so, you know, there was a huge groundswell in awareness with even small businesses in like towns like Mound City. And it was all around the country. I mean, you know as well as I do that COVID killed a lot of businesses because they could not adapt. But many of them did, and it created, I think, even more opportunity. You know, I'm tied into a couple of organizations here in the state, and Main Street in America is resurging. And you've got main streets across the country that are in small to medium-sized towns that now have leadership funded by state organizations to revive the markets that they're in. And with what happened during COVID, all these small businesses are now getting introduced to digital branding and marketing and e-commerce services that I don't think they would have been on their radar 10 years ago.
Yeah,
and so
definitely.
COVID created, by virtue of these companies being aware, brand new demand.
I'm so glad you said that. I've been preaching that message recently. Like, there is such a demand now. So the opportunity is greater than ever. Yes, the market is flooded with, you know, more demand. Opportunity means there's a lot more fish in the sea. But I don't know if you agree with this, but one thing I've seen, and there's a couple of quotes that articulate this, but it's basically to the point that just because there's a lot of people doing what you're doing, it doesn't mean that there's an abundance of quality. And if you can stand out and be really good, and quite frankly, everything we've talked about so far, Matt, if you show up on time, you communicate well, and you really care, there it is. That is all you need to stand out from everybody else. Because I guarantee for every one designer who really cares and who communicates well and is learning and sharing what they're learning, there are 100 designers who are after a quick dollar, who would burn that client in a heartbeat to get a quick payday. So be the 1%. That's the message on this. I love that you mentioned that, because there's such a demand now. And I do think a lot of companies are taking a hybrid approach to where they're like, okay, we can open up our brick and mortar store, but we need to also have our online presence, because who God only knows if that's going to happen again, something similar.
Well, and that's, you know, here in a small town, Mound City, there are a lot of businesses that have found their revenues going up because they found a market outside of the local area. You know, they're catching the bug. I mean, when you've got crafters on Etsy, and you've got people that are doing stuff on there where your market is global, you know, the buyers are worldwide. I mean, it may take some of these small town businesses a little bit longer to get the picture, but the business owners that I know around me, they're hardworking. They sell a good product, and they care about their customers. And now they've got customers now that are all over the world, not just within 10 or 15-minute drive of small little town.
Oh, that's great, man. And one thing I'm curious about too. Did you market yourself or get out as a generalist, or did you go niche in any way? Like, what did your services look like? And who did you help once you really? I've always kind of positioned myself as a brand web and graphic designer, and I've really loved being a part of all of those. I love just that creative side. So web design just becomes an extension of who I am as a creative. Mm-hmm. But you know, because I am a freelancer, because of my limitations in terms of how much I can take on at a given point in time, I really have to look for a certain client.
And I have to look for a client, number one, that's got a budget that wants to do something, but I'm not probably going to go out and bid that $50,000 job because that's probably going to take more resources and probably take more coordination that I'm going to want to put forth as a business owner. So I had to really determine, what's my sweet spot product? And if I could stay in that $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 mark, that is something I could do and really get good at. And I could make that I could build a business on that. And again, when people see what you do, again, in small towns and even big towns, people start to know what you're all about. Yeah. They know what you're good at. They know who Matt is. They know who Josh is. They know what Josh is really, really good at. And if you need blank, you need to go see Josh. I mean, that's just once I kind of got that started in my business, it kind of took on a little bit of a life of its own. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you right now. I mean, I probably say most of my business that comes to me now is through referral. If it's not through my website,
I was going to say this much later. Yeah, you probably don't even need to market. You have
I do very, very little. I'm active a little bit on social media, but almost not.
And I do agree. I think the sweet spot is 5 to 15. I think and the good news is a $5,000 job doesn't have to be any different than a $10,000 job. You just price it more and you just share your value, because there's plenty of jobs I did for 5,000. And then I had a couple of years later was doing them for 10. And I was like, damn it, should have done this 3 years ago. So that's the good news. Like you can do a brochure style, conversion based, good messaged, well-designed website with solid SEO foundation, all the things I teach in my courses for 5 to 15,000. And there you go. Now, cause you're right. Like the $50,000 projects, bigger is not always better. And then usually in my experience, when you have to do an RFP, a request for proposal, or one of these, it's like, you're basically a part-time employee for like 6 months. And I would rather, instead of getting one big 50,000, I'd rather do 5 really solid $10,000 and get them all on my maintenance plan and go that way. So I love your smile tells me that's exactly what you recommend as well.
Yeah. I love it.
That's great, man. And I would like to transition to what you're doing now, because I know you're running your business. Did you scale at all? Did you ever bring on employees, or did you just figure out how to do it as a solopreneur?
No, I have been a solopreneur for my freelance career. I will and have worked with contractors on a limited basis, depending on needs for a project or whatever. But as far as full-time staff or whatever, no, it's just me.
That's great. So I'm actually literally putting together an upcoming It's probably going to be released by the time this comes out, depending. But I'm putting together this framework based off of the 4 stages of web designers that I've come to realize and see, and that I progress through. And that is, number 1, a freelancer doing work for, and I want to see if you agree with this or if I'm missing anything. Freelancer works with businesses, doing everything him or herself, often white label. So they'll work with other agencies to build sites for them. Then there's the solopreneur who dedicates, still running them themselves. Maybe they'll hire out some work every once in a while, but it's them. They're doing all the sales, all the project fulfillment, but they're not working for other agencies. They're just working for their own business. And then there's the business owner. That's who is going to scale the business and isn't in the weeds doing project work anymore. They're running the business. They're working on their business, working on marketing and things like that, and growing. And then there's the webpreneur. There's the you and me of the world who are teaching, getting online courses. Maybe we're still doing some client work, but we're primarily, in the web design world, entrepreneur space. Do you agree with that? Or do you feel like I'm missing anything in there?
No, I think you're right on. I think that, and I would say that I missed the business owner thing just because I like the work too much. I left my agency job because I didn't want to micromanage. I didn't want to be the management guy. I love building. And I loved having the relationship with the clients, which is something I didn't get in agency work. And as a business owner, if you're not doing the work, you have to bring the work in. You're doing biz development. But no, I love to have my hands in the building. That's still too much fun for me.
And I'm glad you got that point up, because those stages, it's not to say that is the path everyone should take. Neither one of those are right or wrong. Some people go through, like I went through all 4 basically phases, but you skipped the business owner and you like being a solopreneur, and that's great. Like if you can do all the work and manage it and raise your prices and do a lot of good work for a small amount of people and just get referrals, that's fine. That's the way to go. Some people would rather not do any of the work and just focus on business stuff. And that's fine too. Like the thing that's cool about that realization and that visual to me is that there are these like main paths, and maybe there's different paths in and outside of that, but those are the 4 paths that I've seen work for different style web designers and freelancers. And they're all available to us. Like, I don't know if you had in your mind to teach and have a podcast one day, or if one day you were just like, I've learned a lot, I should share this stuff. Is that kind of how that came into play for you?
I mean, the podcast is, I mean, actually it's been on my mind for probably 5 or 6 years. I just hem and hawed and didn't pull the trigger on it. But as far as the teaching and stuff like that, that was actually kind of accidental. As I started speaking, at some local conferences for web design, I started getting questions, and they were all questions about business. And so it was kind of like, well, you know what? It seems to me like there's a lot of people got these questions, and I happen to have the answers. I kind of lived through it. So I kind of felt like it was an opportunity, to somewhat give back. And, I had a conversation with myself at that time. I'm like, if I could go back in time and have a conversation with my younger self, what would I tell myself? And, I made a list of things, and I'm like, well, I can't help my younger self, but there are probably some people out there right now that probably could use this information.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at your site at freelanceceo.com. What is really cool is it seems like you're bringing people out of employee corporate jobs to probably one of the first 2 categories that I mentioned. Is that right? Like you're helping people become freelancers and solopreneurs. I personally feel like the difference between the 2 is that a solopreneur is a freelancer with a business focus, whereas most freelancers are just winging it. They're just trying to survive, get job to job, do whatever, mow the lawn, whatever. Whereas like the solopreneur is the CEO of their freelance business, as you would probably frame it.
Yeah, to me, I would say most of the people that I'm working with right now have been in some form or fashion in industry. Whether they're working in corporate or they're working in agency, or they've maybe smaller, big company, and they're trying to say, hey, could I make this go on my own? And, as far as the CEO, tag on the title, yeah, it's to me, when I probably, wearing the term freelancer really does have some negative connotations in the business world, because it does seem like, they're, here today, gone tomorrow, flighty, not stable. Well, I've always called myself a freelancer, but I've always been busy building a business. And I've always looked at it from the standpoint, I'm not looking for my next meal. I'm looking toward to my last. Mm-hmm. I have an end in mind. That this is not, tomorrow is not the end. My end is somewhere down the road, and I'm working to build something for that. So, having a plan and helping others have a plan, and just like you said, just so they're not winging it as they're going along trying to make some money.
Yeah, I love that. The tagline on your homepage, think like a creative, act like a CEO. I absolutely love that. I'm totally going to pull that and make sure we put a graphic together when we kick this out, because that's a great mission. Like, yeah, balance creativity and CEO. Because I do feel like in my experience, especially in the graphic design world, my gosh, I came from that world, so I understand. It's like you're solely focused on artistic expression and art and things that aren't profitable, and things like you could do if somebody else is worrying about budgets and things like that. But you got to hit a deadline, you got to get something done, and there is a very, very thin line between like being creative and artistic and being profitable and having some mind of. But you don't need to be like this crummy, greedy corporate guy or gal, to be a CEO or a business owner, but you do probably want to make sure you make money and stay in business. Otherwise, it's a hobby. You better have a job somewhere. So I love your mission, man. I think it's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So yeah, perfect segue, I guess, to wrap this up and to ask you, I have a final question for you here, Matt, but where would you like people to go? Is there a certain resource or something, or do you have any, like a free guide or anything that you'd like to send people to?
Yeah. So probably what I would probably recommend is freelanceceo.com/blueprint is probably one of my best freebies. It really basically is a roadmap that I've put together that shows people what they need to have in their business to be successful. It's not a long book, but at least shows enough detail that somebody who's wanting to get a better idea about what it takes to be successful as a freelancer, that's just basically a really good guide that I recommend.
Awesome. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes. And yeah, I would recommend everyone check out your website, Matt, freelanceceo.com. A lot of great resources. I love what you're up to. And then your freelance site, redlogic.com, if anyone wants to check that out. You said earlier you're not the best with copywriting, but I don't know if I agree with you, because I love your messaging on your site. I mean, I'm sure it's been refined over the years, but it's very clear that you're helping people get their message out with everything that you've done through your site. So yeah, man, that's super cool. I love your journey, your progression, and really everything that you've shared today. This has been really, really cool. And you've backed up a lot of my teachings and advice for just like stay organic. Nowadays, like you mentioned, there's more opportunity than ever. So it doesn't matter where the heck you live, as long as your internet's internet's not even that big of a deal, because you could just batch your calls together and you don't have to worry about a video call. So exactly right. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, man. One final question. If you were starting today and you did not have a personal network that you came from, and you were rural, what would you do? What would be like one strategy you would do?
I think if I was getting started today, I would get crystal clear on the value that I bring to the market. You can't sell yourself to a business owner if you can't clearly articulate what business problem you solve and what results you can get for a client. To me, I wish, Josh, that I had done that a long time ago when I got started. Today, if I was getting started and had no clients, that would be where I would start. I would look at what skills I have and how they impact the marketplace. Get crystal clear and be able to tell someone what you do and what value you provide and how you can help them in their business. To me, I feel like if people can do that, they can walk up to just about anybody and have a conversation. And if that person doesn't become a customer, they at least know what you do and can share that with somebody else. So there's my number one tip to leave.
What a tip to end off, man. Boom. Thank you so much, Matt. This was gold. Thanks for taking the time, dude.
Oh, you bet, dude. It's been fun, Josh.
This has been fun. I really enjoyed getting to know you better and diving into this, man. Won't be the first time. Won't be the only time. It is the first time, but it won't be the last time. There we go.
Yeah. And I thank you for that. And be watching for the invite. I would love to get you on my podcast here very soon.
I'm in. Let's do it. Hey friends, it's Josh here. I just wanted to mention a couple quick things before you head out. First off, if you've been enjoying the show, please consider leaving a podcast review. I personally read all the podcast reviews. I love hearing your thoughts and feedback on the show, and it also really helps grow this podcast. You can do that easily if you go to joshhall.co/podcast review, and you can leave a review wherever you listen to the show. And then I also wanted to make sure you know that for all the extras on every one of these podcast episodes, you can go to joshhall.co/podcast. We have a post there for every episode, which includes full transcriptions, timestamps, and all the links and resources that we mentioned. So just go to joshhall.co/podcast for all the extra goodies. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next episode.